3 days before someone tried to throw a 300-person festival on my land. I was out there at sunrise doing what I always do, walking the line, checking the soil, listening to how the ground sounds under my boots, and I remember thinking how quiet it felt, how predictable, how earned. By that afternoon, I had survey flags stuck into my dirt like it belonged to someone else, and a laminated notice zip-tied to my gate telling me, in neat official language, that a community event had been approved on my property. And the strange part is, legally, for a moment there, it almost looked like they had the right to do it. Before I get into how that even happened, go ahead and drop a comment telling me where you're watching from. I always like seeing how far these stories travel. So, I've owned this land since 2013, just outside a mid-sized town most people pass through on their way somewhere else. It's about 30 acres, give or take, and the front half looks like what people call open meadow. You know, clean, green, soft-looking grass that makes folks think picnic, frisbee, barefoot afternoons. I get why people see it that way, from the road. It looks peaceful, almost unused. But that field isn't decoration. It's not empty space. It's my work. I run a licensed lawn care and turf management operation, small but steady. Built it up over the years with more patience than money at the start. That front section is part of a rotation system I designed myself. Sections grow while others rest. Some get cut down to near dirt. Some get reseeded. Some get treated and left alone for weeks. Every inch of that land has a purpose, and more importantly, a schedule. I've got notebooks going back over a decade, dates, soil conditions, treatment cycles. Weather notes scribbled in margins. It's not random. It's a system that only works if you respect timing. Miss a window, rush a phase, let people trample a section at the wrong time, and you don't just lose grass, you lose months of progress. Now, on the other side of my west fence, there's a subdivision. Neat houses, trimmed hedges, HOA signs at the entrance like they're guarding a kingdom. And the head of that HOA, or at least the loudest voice in it, is a woman named Carol Dempsey. Carol's the kind of person who smiles when she's asking for something and tightens up real quick when you say no. First time she came by was about 2 years ago, late spring, I think. I was near the gate fixing a section of fence when she walked up, sunglasses, clipboard, that kind of energy. She introduced herself, polite enough, and said they were looking for a space to host a small neighborhood gathering. Maybe 50 people, nothing big. I told her straight, I'm sorry, but this isn't public land. It's part of my business, and I'm not insured for events. She nodded, gave me that understanding look people practice in the mirror, said she completely respected that, and then asked again a month later. Second time, she framed it differently. Said it would be good for community connection, that it might even increase property value for the whole area, including mine, like I hadn't thought about my own property value in 10 years of owning it. I said no again. Same reasons. Maybe a little firmer that time. And that's where something shifted. She didn't argue, not openly. She just paused, smiled thinner this time, and said, well, we'll find a way to make something work. Now, at the time, that didn't sound like a threat. It sounded like persistence. I figured she meant they'd find another field, or a park, or rent a space somewhere. I went back to my work. Spring rolled into early summer, and I was deep into my rotation schedule. That front field, the one people like to stare at when they drive by, it was mid-cycle. I had sections I'd intentionally left longer, others I'd been preparing for a full cut and soil treatment at the beginning of June. That timing matters. Early June is when the ground conditions line up just right. Moisture, temperature, growth rate. You can reset a whole section if you do it right. And I had it planned, marked out weeks in advance. Then one morning, early April, I took my usual walk along the property line, coffee in hand, just checking things, and I noticed something off. Little wooden stakes in the ground. Bright flags. Not mine. I walked closer, already feeling that tightness in my chest you get when something doesn't belong where it is, and then I saw the notice on my gate. County letterhead. Official stamp. I stood there reading it twice, then a third time slower, like maybe the words would change if I gave them enough time. Community Lawn Festival permit approved. 300 attendees. Vendors. Temporary stage. Recreational activities. Location, my parcel number. They hadn't asked me. They hadn't even told me. They went around me. I remember actually laughing once, just a short, confused kind of laugh, because it felt too ridiculous to be real. Like someone filed paperwork on your house, and now it belongs to a bake sale. But the more I read, the less funny it got. They'd filed it under some classification that labeled the land as open recreational space adjacent to residential development. Which, technically, if you squint at a map and ignore ownership, I guess it could look that way. And the county, they approved it. So now I've got a piece of paper telling the world that in a couple months, people are going to show up with folding chairs and food trucks and kids running around on land that I've been managing like a clock for over a decade. I went inside, set the paper down on the table, and just stood there for a minute. No music, no TV, just that quiet hum of the house, trying to figure out if I was angry or impressed or both. Because I'll give them this, it was bold. Wrong, but bold. And that's when I made a decision that, at the time, felt less like revenge and more like staying exactly where I was, refusing to move just because someone else decided to pretend I didn't exist. I didn't call Carol. I didn't argue. I called the county instead. And I asked one very simple question. Does that permit say anything about active turf management or restricted treatment zones? There was a pause on the other end, not a long one, just long enough to tell me the person I was talking to hadn't thought about that angle before. I could hear papers shifting, keys tapping. Then she said, "No, sir, it's listed as open grassland suitable for temporary public use." Open grassland. I almost smiled at that. Not because it was funny, but because it told me exactly where the gap was. To them, it was just grass. A flat green surface. Something you could walk on, set up tents on, spill lemonade on, and then leave. To me, it was mid-cycle. And that difference, that misunderstanding, that's where everything turned. I thanked her, hung up, and walked back outside. Stood at the edge of that front field and really looked at it. Not the way someone driving by sees it, but the way I always have. I could see the sections I'd let grow a little longer, the areas where the soil was ready to be turned, the subtle color differences that tell you what's coming next if you know how to read it. And right there, in my head, I could see the calendar. June 1st. That was the date I had already set, weeks ago, long before any permit existed, for a full cut and soil treatment on that exact section. Not a light trim. I'm talking about taking it down low, almost to the dirt, leveling it out, feeding the soil, resetting the whole cycle so it comes back stronger. It's not pretty work. It's not meant to be walked on. It's the kind of phase where, if you don't know what you're looking at, it just looks like something went wrong. And suddenly, I didn't need to change anything. That was the part that made it sit right with me. I wasn't scrambling to block them. I wasn't inventing a problem. I was just not stepping aside. Still, I wanted to be sure. So a couple days later, I drove down to the county office. Walked in, paper in hand, boots still dusty, and asked to speak with someone about the permit. They put me in a small office with a guy named Russell, mid-50s, tired eyes, the kind of man who's seen enough paperwork disputes to know most of them aren't simple. He read through the permit, nodded a couple times, then looked up at me. "Do you own this parcel?" "Since 2013, I said. "And this is part of a business?" "Licensed. Documented. Active rotation system." He leaned back a little, thinking. "That wasn't disclosed in the application." "Yeah," I said. I figured. There was a moment there, quiet, but not awkward. Just two people recognizing the same thing from different sides. He tapped the paper. "If this area is undergoing treatment, especially chemical or soil destabilization, it wouldn't meet safety requirements for public use." I didn't jump on it. Didn't lean forward. I just asked, calm as I could. "And if that treatment was already scheduled?" He gave me a look. Not suspicious, not approving, just aware. "Then you'd be operating within your normal business practices." That was it. No loophole. No trick. Just the truth, laid out plain. I thanked him, folded the paper, and left. Driving back, I remember feeling, not angry, not exactly. Focused, maybe. Like everything had snapped into alignment in a way that didn't require me to push, just to follow through. Because here's the thing. If they had come to me, if they had asked again, if they had said, "Hey, we know you said no before, but is there any way we can work something out?" Maybe I still would have said no. Probably would have. But at least we'd be having a conversation. Instead, they skipped that part. They turned it into paperwork and assumptions. So I went back to my schedule. June came up fast. It always does when you're working outdoors. 1 week you're planning, the next you're doing. On the morning of June 1st, I had my full crew out there. Guys I've worked with for years, people who know the land almost as well as I do. We had commercial mowers, trimmers, rollers, everything lined up. One of them, Jake, looked out at the field and said, "You sure you want to take this whole section down today? It still looks good." "It's time," I told him. And that was the truth. We started just after sunrise. The sound of those mowers kicking on, it's loud, steady, almost calming if you're used to it. Row by row, we worked the field, cutting it down evenly, methodically. No rush, no hesitation, just doing the job right. And as the hours went on, that soft green meadow people liked to imagine, it disappeared. What replaced it wasn't ugly, not to me, but it wasn't inviting. Short stubble, exposed soil and patches, the kind of surface that tells you clearly, this isn't for walking. This isn't for gathering. This is in between. By midday, we brought in the soil treatment. Fertilizer, stabilizers, the stuff that helps the next growth phase come in strong, but also the kind of thing that requires time, space, and no interference. We posted markers, same as always. County-compliant signs indicating restricted access during restoration. I've used those signs for years. Never had anyone question them before. By the end of the day, that field was exactly where it was supposed to be, according to a plan I'd made long before anyone decided it was a festival ground. And then we waited. The event was scheduled for the second Saturday of June. About a week later, I started seeing movement near the fence line. People walking the perimeter, measuring, talking. You can always tell when something's about to happen by the way folks look at land like it's already theirs. Then came the trucks. Vendors, organizers, volunteers. I watched from a distance that first morning as they pulled up, doors opening, people stepping out with that kind of busy energy you see before an event kicks off. Folding tables, crates, banners, all of it. And then they looked out at the field. I wish I could fully describe that moment, because it wasn't loud. There wasn't yelling right away. It was quieter than that. Confusion first. Heads tilting. People squinting like maybe they were in the wrong place. Because what they were expecting, soft grass, open space, something ready to host them, it wasn't there. Instead, they got a working field mid-restoration. I saw Carol not long after. She stepped out of an SUV, same posture as always, confident, until she actually took in the view. She walked a few steps forward, stopped, then turned in a slow circle like the answer might be behind her. I stayed by the fence. Didn't wave. Didn't call out. Just watched. She spotted me eventually. Of course she did. And the look on her face, it wasn't just anger. It was something sharper. Like the moment you realize a plan didn't just fail. It was built on something that was never yours to begin with. She started walking toward me. Quick at first, then faster. "Ethan," she called out. "What is this?" I didn't move. "It's my field." She gestured wide, frustrated. This is not what was here." "It is," I said. "This is what it looks like right now." Her voice tightened. "We have a permit. We have vendors arriving. This was approved." I nodded once. "Yeah, for open grass." She stopped a few feet from the fence, staring at me like I'd just switched the rules mid-game. "You did this on purpose." And I remember that pause, just long enough to choose my words carefully, because this part mattered more than anything else. "I followed my schedule," I said. She let out a short laugh, sharp and disbelieving. "Oh, come on. You expect me to believe this is a coincidence?" I shrugged slightly. "Believe whatever you want. This is how I maintain my land." There was a beat there, tension sitting heavy between us, the kind that doesn't need shouting to feel loud. Behind her, I could see people starting to hesitate, unloading, slowing down, conversations picking up in clusters. Something was unraveling, and we both knew it. And you could feel it unraveling in real time, not in some dramatic, explosive way, but in that slow, uncomfortable shift where people stop moving with purpose and start looking at each other for answers that no one has. Boxes stayed half open. A couple of folding tables never made it out of the truck. Someone killed the music they had just started testing, and all of it kind of hovered there in this awkward limbo. Carol turned back toward her people, trying to hold it together. "Just give me a minute," she said, like if she said it calmly enough the situation might bend back into shape. Then she pulled out her phone and stepped a few paces away, already dialing. I didn't need to hear the conversation to know who she was calling. Within maybe 20 minutes, county truck pulled up. Same logo I'd seen on that permit notice. Two inspectors stepped out. One of them a younger guy with a clipboard, the other older, slower, the kind who scans a place before he says a word. They walked straight onto the field, or tried to. The younger one stopped almost immediately when he saw the markers, those bright signs staked into the ground warning of active treatment and restricted access. He looked back at the older guy, said something I couldn't hear, and they both crouched down to take a closer look at the soil. From where I stood, I could see it clear as day. The texture wasn't stable, the surface uneven, still settling from the work we'd done. And the treatment, that wasn't something you just ignored for the sake of a bounce house and a few food trucks. Carol walked up to them fast, talking before they even stood back up. Hands moving, voice tight, explaining, pushing. You could tell she was trying to steer the narrative back toward the permit, toward the approval, toward something official she could hold on to. The older inspector finally straightened up and held up a hand, not aggressive, just enough to pause her. He said something, then pointed at the ground, then at the signs. Even from a distance, I could read the body language. This wasn't going her way. A few minutes later, they came over toward the fence where I was standing. The younger one looked at me first. You the property owner? Yeah. You recently treated this area? Started June 1st, I said. Full cut, soil stabilization, standard rotation. He nodded, writing something down. The older one looked out over the field again, then back at me. Any documentation on your schedule? In the house, I said. Logs go back years. He didn't even need to see them right then. You could tell he believed me. Not because of anything I said, but because the land itself backed it up. Nothing about that field looked improvised. He turned back toward Carol, who had followed them over, and his tone shifted slightly, still professional, but firmer now. Ma'am, this area is currently under active treatment. That makes it non-compliant for public use under county safety regulations. Carol shook her head immediately. But we have a permit. This was approved weeks ago. Yes, he said, based on the condition of open, untreated land. That's not the case anymore. She stepped closer, lowering her voice like she was trying to keep control of the moment. So what are you saying? We just cancel? The morning of. The younger inspector answered this time, a little more direct. I'm saying you can't hold an event here today. There it was. Plain. Final. For a second, nobody spoke. The kind of silence that lands heavy, because there's no argument left that changes anything. Carol looked past them, straight at me. And I'll be honest, there was a flash of something in her expression I hadn't seen before. Not just anger, not just frustration, something closer to realization. Like she finally understood that this wasn't a loophole I found overnight. This was something she never bothered to understand in the first place. She turned away without another word, walked back toward her group, and started giving instructions. Short, clipped sentences. You didn't need to hear them to know what they were. Pack it up. Shut it down. We're done here. And just like that, the whole thing collapsed. Vendors started loading back into their trucks. A guy who had been setting up a small stage just stood there for a minute, hands on his hips, then slowly started taking it apart piece by piece. Someone folded up a banner that had probably taken hours to design, all bright colors and cheerful lettering for an event that never even started. It wasn't loud. That's the part people always expect. Yelling, arguments, some big dramatic scene. But most of it was quiet. Disappointed. Frustrated in that tired way where people don't have the energy to fight something they can't fix. By early afternoon, they were gone. The field stayed exactly as it was. And I stayed right where I'd been, leaning against that fence for a while longer, just watching the dust settle, listening to the kind of silence that only comes after something almost happened. My phone buzzed about an hour later. Unknown number. I let it ring. Then again. Then again. Fourth time, I didn't even check. I knew who it was. I never picked up. Not because I wanted to be difficult, but because I didn't have anything new to say. Everything that needed to be said had already been said weeks ago, the first time she asked, and the second time she asked, and the moment she decided to go around me instead of through me. That evening, I walked the field again. Same way I always do. Slow, steady, checking the ground with the toe of my boot, looking at how the soil was settling, how the treatment was taking. And standing there, you wouldn't have known anything had happened that day. No trash left behind, no damage done, just a field in the middle of its cycle, doing exactly what it was supposed to do. That's the part that stuck with me. I didn't go out of my way to stop them. I didn't break anything, didn't lie, didn't rush a single step. I just kept doing my work, on land that I own, on a schedule that existed long before their plans did. But I'd be lying if I said there wasn't a moment, just a small one, where I felt a little satisfaction watching that whole setup come undone. Not because people didn't get their festival, but because, for once, someone who assumed they could override a quiet no had to face what that actually means. And still, I've gone back and forth on it more than I expected. Because on one hand, yeah, they were wrong. They crossed a line, literally and legally. They treated my property like a blank space on a map instead of something owned, managed, and worked on every single day. But on the other hand, there were a lot of people who showed up that morning expecting a good time. Families, kids, small vendors who probably counted on that event. They didn't file the paperwork. They didn't make the call to go around me. They just trusted that everything had been handled. So where does that leave it? Was it justified, or just technically correct? Was I protecting what's mine, or making a point at the expense of people who had nothing to do with the decision? I've got my answer, but I'm more interested in yours. So tell me this. If someone scheduled something like that on your property without asking, and you had a completely legitimate way to shut it down without breaking a single rule, would you do the same thing I did? Or would you have handled it differently? Be honest. I read more of those comments than you probably think.